laughter stopped too late. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, the fight was already over. A giant man lay on the ring floor, unmoving, and standing over him was a waitress. The sound of his body hitting the canvas still echoed through the room. Seconds ago, they were laughing, betting millions on him. Now no one spoke, because she hadn't even broken a sweat. So how did the weakest person in the room just break the strongest? And now, as the room struggled to understand what had just happened, one question settled over everyone. Who was the waitress? No one in that room knew her real name. To them, she was just another quiet waitress working long hours in a dangerous nightclub. A woman who carried drinks, kept her head down, and stayed invisible. But the woman standing in that arena was not ordinary. Long before she ever stepped inside this club, she had lived a very different life. A life filled with discipline, training, and sacrifice. And the reason she was standing in that ring tonight had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with a promise she made 5 years earlier. A promise she had carried through grief, through silence, and through years of careful planning. Because the powerful men laughing in that room had no idea who they were really dealing with. And the man who mocked her the loudest had no idea that the woman he pushed into the arena had been waiting 5 years to meet him again. But before we continue, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy powerful mafia stories like this one. Now let's go back to where this story truly began. 5 years earlier, on a night that was supposed to be the happiest night of Keisha Maddox's life. 5 years earlier, Keisha Maddox stood by the window of a quiet hotel room, watching the city lights sparkle far below. The soft breeze moved the curtain beside her. Behind her, Julian Maddox placed 2 cups of tea on the small table near the bed. "You're still thinking about work, aren't you?" Julian said with a gentle smile. Keisha turned and laughed softly. "Old habits," she admitted. For years she had lived under strict routines, missions, and discipline in the military. Relaxing still felt strange to her. Julian walked over and took her hand. "Well, tonight you're not a soldier," he said. "Tonight you're just my wife." The word wife made her smile. Only a few hours earlier, they had celebrated their wedding with close family and friends. Now they were finally alone on their honeymoon. For the first time in years, Keisha felt calm. No missions. No danger. Just the quiet beginning of a life she and Julian had dreamed about for so long. They sat together on the bed, talking about the future. Julian spoke about starting a small consulting business. Keisha talked about leaving the military and building a peaceful life together. Outside, the city moved slowly through the night. But as the clock passed midnight, a faint sound echoed from the hallway outside their door. Keisha's smile faded slightly. She looked toward the door. Another sound followed. Footsteps. Julian noticed her expression. "It's probably just another guest," he said calmly. Still, Keisha's instincts were already awake. Then suddenly, someone knocked on the door. Hard and impatiently. Julian looked toward the door, confused. "Are we expecting anyone?" he asked. Keisha slowly stood from the bed. Something about the knock didn't feel right. It wasn't the polite knock of a hotel guest. It was hard, sharp, demanding. Before Keisha could reach the door, the knocking came again. This time louder. Julian walked closer and looked through the small peephole. He frowned. "I don't see." The door suddenly burst open with a violent crash. 3 armed men rushed into the room. Everything happened in seconds. Julian stepped in front of Keisha instinctively. "Stay behind me," he said. But Keisha was already moving. Her military training took over instantly. She grabbed the lamp from the table and swung it toward the nearest attacker, forcing him backward. Another man raised his weapon. Keisha kicked the edge of a chair toward him, slowing his aim for a split second. But they were outnumbered. A fourth person stepped calmly into the room. A woman. Tall, cold, watching everything with quiet control. Her dark eyes locked onto Keisha with unsettling calm. This woman wasn't panicking like the others. She was studying the room. Then her gaze shifted to Julian. For a moment, the room fell silent. Julian held Keisha's hand tightly. "What do you want?" he demanded. The woman didn't answer. She simply tilted her head slightly. And one of the men raised his weapon toward Julian. Keisha moved to stop it. But she was a fraction of a second too late. The sound that followed shattered the quiet room. Julian's grip on Keisha's hand tightened for a brief moment. Then his body collapsed beside her. "Julian!" Keisha cried, dropping to her knees. Everything around her blurred. But the men were still moving. One of them stepped forward, raising his weapon toward her. Keisha's instinct snapped back to life. She grabbed the fallen chair beside her and swung it hard into the man's legs. He stumbled backward, crashing into the table. Another attacker rushed forward. Keisha kicked the bedside lamp toward him, forcing him to shield his face. She didn't stop moving. She grabbed Julian's arm, trying to pull him toward the balcony door. "Stay with me," she whispered desperately. But Julian's eyes were already fatting. Footsteps thundered across the room behind her. Keisha knew she could not stay. With one final glance at Julian, she pushed open the balcony door and climbed over the railing. The cold night air hit her face as she lowered herself down to the narrow ledge below. Inside the room, the attackers rushed toward the balcony. But before they could reach her, a voice stopped them. The woman. Valeria. She stepped forward and looked down at Keisha calmly. For a moment, their eyes locked again. Valeria didn't look angry. She didn't even look surprised. She simply studied Keisha with quiet interest. Then she spoke softly. "You should not have survived tonight." And with that, she turned away from the balcony, leaving Keisha alone in the darkness below. By the time the police arrived, the hotel hallway was full of flashing lights and quiet whispers. Keisha sat on a chair outside the room, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her. Her hands were still shaking. Officers moved in and out of the room, speaking in low voices. One detective finally approached her. "Mrs. Maddox," he said gently, "we're going to do everything we can to find who did this." Keisha nodded, but inside she felt something strange. Something was wrong. Over the next few days, investigators asked many questions. They took statements. They examined the room. They collected security footage. But every answer only created more confusion. The hotel cameras near the hallway had stopped working that night. Witnesses said they heard loud noises, but no one saw the attackers leave. Even the wounded man Keisha had injured was gone. As the weeks passed, the investigation slowed. Phone calls stopped coming. Emails were no longer returned. One afternoon, Keisha walked into the police station, asking for updates. The officer at the desk avoided her eyes. "The case is still open," he said quickly. But Keisha could hear it in his voice. No one was really looking anymore. That night, sitting alone in the small apartment she had moved into, Keisha opened Julian's laptop. She began reading through the files from his work. Numbers. Transactions. Bank transfers. At first they meant nothing. But then one name appeared again. And again. And again. Keisha leaned closer to the screen. The name connected to every hidden transaction was the same. Alexander Hale. Keisha stared at the name on the laptop screen for a long time. Alexander Hale. The name appeared again and again in Julian's files, hidden inside complicated financial transactions. Shell companies. Offshore accounts. Secret transfers that moved millions of dollars through different countries. Julian must have discovered something important. Something dangerous. Keisha leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. For weeks, she had waited for the police to bring answers. Now she understood why they never did. Alexander Hale was not an ordinary criminal. He was powerful. Too powerful. People like him didn't face investigations. They buried them. Keisha slowly reopened the files and continued reading. One business address appeared more often than the others. It was listed as a luxury entertainment company. But the financial records told a different story. Large amounts of money were moving through the business every week. Far more than a nightclub should ever earn. Keisha opened a new window and searched for the address. Photos appeared on the screen. A tall building glowing with neon lights. Luxury cars parked outside. Security guards at the entrance. The sign above the door read, Hale's Crown Nightclub. Keisha stared at the image quietly. Inside that building was the man responsible for the worst night of her life. But getting close to him would not be easy. People like Alexander Hale lived, surrounded by guards and loyal soldiers. Then a thought slowly formed in her mind. A way to enter the building without raising suspicion. A way to stand close enough to watch everything. Keisha closed the laptop and whispered quietly to herself, I'm coming. 3 months later, the neon lights of Hale's Crown nightclub glowed brightly against the night sky. Luxury cars lined the street outside the entrance. Inside, music pulsed through the crowded rooms while wealthy guests laughed, drank, and placed bets on private games. Keisha Maddox moved quietly through the crowd, wearing a simple black waitress uniform. Her hair was tied neatly behind her head. A small tray rested in her hands. To everyone around her, she was just another worker carrying drinks from one table to another. Invisible. But Keisha was not there to serve drinks. Every step she took inside that club had a purpose. She watched everything. The guards near the doors. The cameras mounted in the corners of the ceilings. The men who followed Alexander Hale everywhere he went. In the back of the building was the private arena where Hale hosted illegal fight matches for powerful guests. That was where the real money moved. That was where Hale spent most of his nights. Keisha had been working inside the club for several weeks now. Quietly, patiently, learning the patterns, learning the faces, and waiting. Tonight, the club was louder than usual. More guests had arrived. More guards were posted near the arena entrance. It meant one thing: a major fight night. As Keisha walked toward the VIP section carrying fresh drinks, she felt someone watching her. She turned slightly. One of the men, seated at the VIP table, was studying her carefully. He wasn't smiling like the others. He wasn't drinking either. His eyes followed her movements calmly. Keisha placed the drinks on the table and turned to leave. But the man spoke quietly. Wait. Keisha paused slowly. Most waitresses inside Hale's Crown kept their eyes down and moved quickly away from the VIP tables. But the voice that stopped her was calm, not rude like the others. She turned slightly. The man watching her sat comfortably in his chair, his hands resting on the table. His dark suit was simple but expensive. The other men around him laughed loudly, arguing about money and fights. But he was quiet, observing. You forgot something, he said. Keisha looked at the tray in her hands. Sir. The man leaned forward slightly. You forgot to pretend, he said quietly. For a brief moment, Keisha didn't respond. She kept her expression calm. I'm not sure what you mean, she said politely. The man studied her posture carefully. You carry a tray like a waitress, he said. But you stand like someone trained to fight. His eyes held hers. Sharp. Curious. You also watch every exit when you walk through the room. Keisha felt a small chill run down her spine. This man noticed too much. Still, she remained calm. Would you like anything else, sir? She asked. The man leaned back in his chair. "No," he said. Then after a brief pause, he added, "But I will remember you." Keisha nodded politely and turned to leave. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes still following her. One of the other guests at the table leaned toward him and laughed. "Why are you staring at a waitress, Antonov?" The man didn't smile. Instead, he said quietly, "Because she doesn't belong here." And at that moment, someone else inside the room finally noticed her too. The loudest voice in the VIP section suddenly cut through the music. "Who brought this one?" Keisha stopped walking. Every waitress in the club knew that voice. Alexander Hale, the owner of Hale's Crown nightclub. The man whose name had appeared again and again in Julian's files. Keisha slowly turned back toward the table. Alexander Hale leaned back in his chair, a glass of whiskey in one hand. He was smiling, but there was nothing friendly about it. His sharp eyes studied her from head to toe. "You look nervous," he said loudly. The men around the table laughed. Keisha kept her face calm. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she replied. Hale waved his hand dismissively. "Your job is boring," he said. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "But tonight we're celebrating." He pointed toward the private arena doors across the room. Inside, the crowd roared as another fight ended. "Big fight night," Hale continued proudly. "The best fighters in the city." One of the guests laughed. "Your champion hasn't lost in years." Hale grinned. "Exactly." Then his eyes returned to Keisha. "And now I'm curious." The room grew slightly quieter. Hale slowly stood from his chair. He walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of her. "You walk like someone trained to fight," he said. Then he raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Tell me something." He pointed toward the arena. "Do you think our little waitress could survive in that ring?" The room exploded with laughter. But Keisha did not laugh. Because for the first time, Alexander Hale was standing only a few feet away from her. And he had no idea who she really was. The laughter around the VIP table grew louder. One of the guests leaned forward, wiping tears from his eyes. "A waitress in the ring," he said. "That would be the shortest fight in history." Alexander Hale chuckled and took another sip of whiskey. Then he looked back at Keisha. "Well," he asked loudly, "what do you think?" Keisha kept her voice calm. "I'm not a fighter, sir." More laughter. Hale raised his eyebrows dramatically. "Did you hear that?" he said to the room. "She says she's not a fighter." One of the men slapped the table. "That's even better." Across the table, Mikhail Antonov remained silent. His eyes were still watching Keisha carefully. Hale stepped closer to her. "Tell you what," he said. He pointed toward the arena doors again. "My champion is about to fight." The crowd in the arena roared as another match ended. Hale's smile widened. "Why don't we give the audience something new tonight?" Keisha shook her head gently. "I can't do that." The room fell slightly quieter. Hale's smile faded. He leaned closer so only she could hear him. "Look across the table," he whispered. Keisha's eyes shifted briefly toward Mikhail Antonov. Hale continued quietly. "You refuse me tonight, and that man might have a very bad accident when he leaves my club." Keisha felt her chest tighten. Hale straightened and raised his voice again. "So, waitress." He spread his arms toward the arena. "Show us what you can do." The room waited. Slowly, Keisha placed her tray on the table and began removing her apron. The laughter returned as soon as Keisha removed her apron. One of the men clapped his hands. "Oh, this is going to be good," he said. Alexander Hale smiled proudly as the arena doors opened. The roar of the crowd inside poured into the room. Bright lights flashed across the fighting ring where two guards were already clearing the floor. Hale gestured toward the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, "tonight we have a special surprise." Guests began following him toward the arena seats. Some grabbed stacks of betting chips. Others pulled out their phones, ready to record what they expected to be a humiliating spectacle. Keisha walked behind them quietly. Her face remained calm, but inside her thoughts were racing. She had planned everything carefully. Watching, waiting, studying. But stepping into the arena tonight had never been part of the plan. Still, Hale's threat echoed in her mind. If she refused, someone innocent could pay the price. The arena lights shone brightly as she stepped through the entrance. The underground fight pit was surrounded by cheering guests sitting at round betting tables. At the center stood the ring. Massive, unforgiving. Hale climbed onto the announcer platform with excitement. "Tonight," he shouted into the microphone, "we have something special for you." The crowd cheered. "Our champion will face a new challenger." People leaned forward eagerly. Hale pointed toward Keisha. "A waitress." For a moment, the crowd froze. Then the entire arena exploded with laughter. Across the tables, betting chips began sliding forward. And on the other side of the ring, the undefeated champion stepped through the gate. The man who stepped into the ring looked more like a wall than a fighter. He was huge. His shoulders were wide, his arms thick with muscle, and his knuckles carried the marks of many past fights. The crowd greeted him with loud cheers. Everyone in Hale's crown knew him. He was the undefeated champion of the arena. The fighter who had never walked out of the ring without a victory. He rolled his neck slowly as he looked at Keisha standing across from him. Then he laughed. "You're serious," he said. More laughter erupted around the arena. Some of the guests were already placing bets. Stacks of chips slid across the tables as the announcer called out numbers. Millions of dollars were being wagered on the champion. Why wouldn't they? He was twice her size. The champion cracked his knuckles and stepped closer. "You should walk away," he said quietly. But Keisha didn't move. She simply stood still in the center of the ring, watching, thinking, waiting. Outside the ropes, Alexander Hale leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the show. "This won't take long," he said confidently. Across the arena, Mikhail Antonov sat quietly at his table. His eyes never left Keisha. He watched the way she shifted her weight slightly, the way her hands relaxed instead of tightening, the way her eyes stayed calm. Antonov slowly reached for a stack of betting chips. The men beside him noticed immediately. One of them laughed. "You're not thinking about it, are you?" Antonov pushed the chips forward calmly. "I am." The dealer blinked in surprise. "You're betting on the waitress." Antonov nodded once. "Yes." And at that exact moment, the bell rang. The bell echoed across the arena. For a brief moment, nothing happened. The champion stepped forward slowly, smiling as the crowd shouted encouragement. He clearly wasn't in a hurry. To him, this wasn't a real fight. It was entertainment. Across the ring, Keisha remained still. Her breathing was steady. Her eyes followed every movement of the man approaching her. The champion raised his arms casually. "You should run," he joked. Some of the crowd laughed again. Then he lunged forward, throwing a heavy punch meant to end the fight immediately. But Keisha was already moving. She stepped aside smoothly. The champion's fist sliced through empty air. A few people in the audience stopped laughing. The champion frowned. He swung again, faster this time. Keisha moved again. Quick. Controlled. Every step is carefully placed. Now the room grew quieter. Alexander Hale leaned forward in his chair. The champion tried a third attack, charging with his full weight. But this time Keisha reacted. She stepped inside his reach, twisted her body, and struck with sharp precision. The giant man lost his balance. Gasps rippled across the arena. Before he could recover, Keisha moved again. Another precise strike. The champion collapsed to one knee. The crowd fell silent. A moment later, the giant fighter dropped to the floor completely. The bell rang quickly as guards rushed forward. The undefeated champion was unable to continue. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then whispers spread across the tables. Alexander Hale's smile had disappeared. Across the arena, Mikhail Antonov leaned back slightly. The bet he had placed moments earlier had just won. But Hale wasn't finished. And neither was the night. For several seconds, the arena remained silent. The champion was still on the floor, while the guards helped him out of the ring. Guests stared at Keisha as if they were seeing her for the first time. Moments earlier, she had been nothing more than a joke. Now no one was laughing. Alexander Hale slowly stood from his seat. The smile on his face was gone. Instead, his eyes were cold. "Well," he said loudly, clapping his hands once, "that was unexpected." Some nervous laughter spread through the crowd. Hale turned toward the fighters standing near the arena gate. "Send in Victor." A murmur moved through the audience. Victor was not just another fighter. He was faster than the champion. More experienced. More dangerous. The gate opened again. A lean man stepped into the arena. Unlike the champion, Victor was calm. His sharp eyes studied Keisha carefully as he walked toward the center of the ring. "You surprised everyone," he said quietly. "But this fight will be different." Keisha said nothing. Outside the ropes, betting chips began moving again. This time, the wagers were slower. More cautious. People were no longer completely sure who would win. Alexander Hale leaned toward the betting table. "Double the bets," he ordered confidently. Across the arena, Mikhail Antonov watched silently. The bell had not even rung yet, but something in the air had changed. The crowd felt it too. This was no longer a joke. This was becoming something else entirely. The bell rang again. And Victor attacked immediately. The moment the bell rang, Victor moved fast. Unlike the champion, he did not laugh or hesitate. He attacked with sharp, quick strikes, forcing Keisha to move backward across the ring. The crowd leaned forward in their seats. This fight was already different. Victor's movements were precise and calculated. He circled Keisha carefully, watching her reactions. "You're trained," he said quietly as they moved around each other. Keisha stayed silent. Victor threw a sudden kick aimed at her side. She blocked it and stepped away. The impact still pushed her back slightly. Several people in the audience nodded. This was the kind of fight they expected. Back and forth. Vast. Dangerous. Victor pressed forward again, throwing another combination of strikes. Keisha dodged the first one. The second nearly caught her shoulder. The crowd gasped. For the first time that night, Keisha realized this opponent would not underestimate her. Victor moved again, faster this time. But Keisha adjusted. Her movements became sharper. More focused. She waited for the exact moment his balance shifted. Then she stepped inside his reach. One precise strike. Victor staggered. Before he could recover, Keisha moved again. Another controlled hit. Victor dropped to one knee. The arena went silent once more. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. The referee quickly stepped between them. The second fight was over. The room filled with stunned whispers. Two fighters. Both defeated. Alexander Hale's face had turned dark with anger. Across the arena, Mikhail Antonov slowly leaned forward. He knew what Hale would do next. Because there was only one person left Hale could send into that ring. And everyone in the underworld knew her name. The arena grew quiet as Alexander Hale slowly stood up. His expression was no longer amused. Two of his fighters had already fallen. That had never happened before. Hale walked toward the betting table and placed both hands on the surface. The room waited. Then he smiled. "All right," he said calmly. "If we're going to continue this little show, we might as well make it interesting." He raised his hand and signaled toward the arena gate. The crowd leaned forward. The gate opened slowly. A woman stepped inside. She walked with calm confidence, her eyes fixed on the center of the ring. Keisha's chest tightened the moment she saw her. The face had not changed. The same cold eyes. The same quiet presence. Valeria. The assassin known in the underworld as the Widow. 5 years earlier, she had stood inside a hotel room while Julian Maddox died. Now she stood inside the arena. The crowd reacted instantly. Whispers spread across the tables. Some guests even looked uneasy. The Widow was not just another fighter. She was known for ending fights quickly. Alexander Hale laughed proudly. "Now this," he said loudly, "is a real fight." He pushed a massive stack of betting chips onto the table. "All on Valeria." The dealer announced the bet. The amount made several people gasp. Across the arena, all eyes turned toward Mikhail Antonov. For a moment he remained still. Then he reached forward calmly and pushed his own stack of chips across the table. "I'll take the Waitress." But inside the ring, Valeria was already staring directly at Keisha. And slowly, her eyes began to narrow. The arena had never been this quiet. Even the loudest gamblers at the tables were now watching carefully. Valeria walked slowly toward the center of the ring. Her steps were calm, confident, and controlled. She had fought in this arena many times before. But this time, something felt different. Her eyes never left Keisha. "You move well," Valeria said softly. Keisha did not respond. The two women circled each other slowly. Outside the ropes, Alexander Hale leaned forward with excitement. "This one won't last long," he said. Across the arena, Mikhail Antonov remained silent. He could see the tension in the air. Something deeper than a simple fight was happening inside that ring. Valeria stepped closer. Then she paused. Her head tilted slightly as she studied Keisha's face. A faint look of recognition crossed her expression. "Interesting," Valeria said quietly. Keisha's hands tightened slightly. The bell had not even rung yet. But the moment had already shifted. Valeria's eyes narrowed further. "You look familiar," she continued. Keisha finally spoke. Her voice was calm but cold. 5 years is a long time. Valeria's expression changed. For the first time since entering the ring, the calm assassin looked surprised. The memory was returning. A hotel room. A balcony. A woman who had escaped. Valeria's eyes sharpened. "I remember now," she whispered. The crowd could feel the tension, rising even without knowing the reason. Outside the ring, Alexander Hale frowned slightly. Something about this moment didn't feel like entertainment anymore. Inside the ring, Keisha stepped forward slowly. Then she spoke again. "You destroyed my family." The bell rang, and the final fight began. The bell echoed across the silent arena. For a moment, neither woman moved. Valeria's eyes remained locked on Keisha, the memory of that night 5 years earlier now clear in her mind. "So you're the one who survived," Valeria said quietly. Keisha said nothing. The two began circling each other slowly. This time the crowd did not laugh. They could feel the tension. Valeria attacked first. Her movements were fast and precise, forcing Keisha backward across the ring. The fight was completely different from the others. Every strike carried experience. Every movement was calculated. Gasps rose from the audience as the two fighters exchanged blows. Outside the ropes, Alexander Hale leaned forward with excitement. He had placed a massive bet on Valeria. But the fight was not going the way he expected. Keisha adjusted quickly. She matched Valeria's speed. She countered every move. Then the moment came. Valeria lunged forward with a sharp attack. Keisha stepped aside at the last second. One controlled strike. Valeria lost her balance. A second precise move followed. The widow fell to the mat. The referee rushed forward as the bell rang loudly. Valeria was unable to continue. The arena exploded with shocked voices. Alexander Hale slammed his hand onto the table. His bet was gone. Millions lost. His face twisted with rage. "Enough of this," he shouted. He turned toward his guards. "End this now, remove her." Several armed men began moving toward the ring. But before they reached the ropes, another voice cut through the arena. "Stop." Mikhail Antonov had stood up. His soldiers stepped forward beside him. The room froze. Hale's eyes narrowed. Then Keisha spoke calmly from the center of the ring. "You don't remember me, do you?" Hale stared at her. Keisha stepped closer. "5 years ago," she said quietly, "you sent your people to a hotel room." Hale's expression changed instantly. He finally understood. And without another word, Alexander Hale turned and ran toward the private exit. Alexander Hale pushed through the private door behind the arena, his footsteps echoing down the long corridor. The laughter and noise of the club faded behind him. For the first time that night, the powerful owner of Hale's crown looked afraid. His guards rushed after him. But before they could reach the exit, a figure stepped into the hallway. Keisha. She had already left the ring. Her face was calm, but her eyes were steady. Hale stopped abruptly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway lights hummed quietly above them. Then Hale forced a smile. "So," he said slowly, "the waitress finally shows her face." Keisha didn't react. "You remember the hotel," she said calmly. Hale's smile faded. "I remember many things," he replied. He glanced toward the guards behind him. "Unfortunately for you, this story ends badly." But before the guards could move, another group entered the corridor from the opposite side. Mikhail Antonov. His men stood quietly behind him. The balance of power shifted instantly. Hale looked from Keisha to Antonov and back again. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. "You planned this?" Hale asked. Keisha shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "You planned it 5 years ago." The hallway grew silent. Hale studied her carefully. "You're not here for money," he realized. Keisha took a small step closer. "No." Hale looked toward the exit again. Then he laughed softly. "So this is revenge?" Keisha's voice remained steady. "No," she said. "This is the end of your control." And for the first time since the fight began, Alexander Hale realized he had nowhere left to run. Alexander Hale stood in the corridor, staring at the men around him. For years, they had followed his orders without hesitation. Now none of them moved. The silence was heavier than any threat. Hale slowly looked back at Keisha. "All this for revenge?" he asked. Keisha's voice stayed calm. "Not revenge," she said. "Justice." Hale gave a dry laugh. "Justice doesn't live in places like this." Keisha stepped closer. "Maybe not," she replied. "But tonight, your control ends." Hale turned toward his guards. "Remove her," he ordered. No one moved. The men who once protected him kept their eyes lowered. They had seen the fights. They had watched the champion fall. They had watched the widow lose. More importantly, they had watched Hale lose the room. Hale slowly understood what had happened. Fear had left the building. And once fear disappears, power follows it. His jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked like he might fight. But instead, he reached toward the guard beside him and took the pistol from the man's holster. The hallway grew tense. Hales stared at the weapon in his hand. Then he slowly pointed to his head. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I will rather kill myself than to die by a woman." Then he turned and fell on the corridor floor. Behind him, the room remained silent. Because everyone knew one thing. Alexander Hale's rule was over. 2 days later, the city was quiet. Mikhail Antonov drove Kasia to a small cemetery outside the city. He didn't ask questions. He simply walked beside her as she carried a single white flower. They stopped in front of a simple grave. Julian Maddox. For a moment, Kasia stood silently. The wind moved softly through the trees. Then she knelt and placed the flower on the stone. "I kept my promise," she said quietly. For 5 years, revenge had been the only thing keeping her alive. Every step she took had led to that night inside Hale's crown. Now the war is finally over. Kasia touched the edge of the grave gently. "I wish you could see me now," she whispered. Behind her, Mikhail remained respectfully silent. He understood that this moment belonged to her. After a while, Kasia stood again. Her eyes were calm now, not filled with anger like before. She looked toward the distant city skyline. For the first time in years, she was not thinking about the past. She was thinking about what came next. Mikhail finally spoke. "Are you ready?" Kasia nodded slowly. "Yes." Because the woman who walked away from that grave was no longer living for revenge. The balcony of Hale's crown was quiet that night. The music inside the club had stopped. The arena below was empty. Only the distant lights of the city stretched across the dark horizon. Kasia Maddox stood by the railing, her hands resting lightly on the cool metal. For a long moment, she simply looked at the skyline. The same city where everything had begun, and where everything had finally ended. Behind her, the balcony door opened softly. Mikhail Antonov stepped outside. He walked toward her and stopped beside the railing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mikhail asked quietly, "Are you ready to live again, or are you still fighting the past?" Kasia didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained on the distant lights. "For 5 years," she said slowly, "revenge was the only thing keeping me alive." She paused. "But tonight, that war is finally over." Mikhail studied her carefully. "And what comes next?" he asked. Kasia turned to face him. "The empire Alexander Hale built is collapsing," she said. "Someone will take control of it." Mikhail raised an eyebrow slightly. "And you think it should be you?" Kasia didn't deny it. "But understand something first," she added calmly. "I don't belong to anyone's empire. If we ever work together, it happens on my terms." Mikhail folded his arms, considering her words. "And those terms are?" "You rule your world," she said. "I rule mine." For a moment, he looked at her. Then he smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Below them, the empty arena sat in silence. But across the city, whispers had already begun spreading. About the woman who entered Hale's crown as a waitress and walked out as something far more powerful. Stories like this are not only about power, revenge, or victory. They remind us of something much deeper about life. Many times in the world, people are judged by what they appear to be on the surface. A quiet person is called weak. A humble worker is seen as unimportant. Someone who stays silent is often underestimated. But this story teaches a powerful lesson. Never judge a person by their position, their job, or their silence. The people who look the smallest in the room may carry the strongest stories, the deepest pain, and the greatest strength. Another lesson from Kasia's journey is about patience and discipline. She did not rush blindly into revenge. She did not allow anger to control her decisions. Instead, she waited prepared and chose the right moment. In real life, success rarely comes from anger or impatience. It comes from self-control, preparation, and resilience. And finally, this story reminds us of something very important. Pain can either destroy a person or build them into someone stronger. Keisha chose to grow stronger. She turned loss into purpose. And that is a lesson anyone can apply in life. No matter how difficult your past may be, your future is still something you can shape. Because strength is not always about fighting. Sometimes, true strength is about rising again after life tries to break you. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe people often underestimate quiet and humble individuals in real life? Or do you think strength usually shows itself openly? Share your opinion in the comments.